Subject this morning, we'll all have salvation. We'll all have salvation. If we could but realize what we are, if we could but realize the one eternal substance which has produced all things as the same consciousness within us and the same power, we could answer that question. But due to delusion and this outward consciousness, we fail to perceive the one presence of God behind all things. The great Ramakrishna said, I remember the Master told me, when he first came years ago to America, he said, I imagine I was doubting if I could ever be saved. He said, Ramakrishna says all will be saved. So I felt better immediately. All will be saved because it cannot go any other way but that. Some of the words of the Master, that is to say that we must gain salvation. In the absolute sense is a misconception because we already have it. We already have the presence of God within us. Our own consciousness is God's consciousness. Just because we do not recognize it, and because there seems a separation between us, does not disprove the fact, and you can prove it if through meditation you realize your oneness with the presence of God within. And so let us realize we do not have to attain salvation in one sense, we just have to realize we have it. In Proverbs, the 8th chapter, the 22nd and 23rd verses, we read as follows. The Lord possessed me in the beginning of his way, before his works of old. That is, we had eternal consciousness. Because from that one consciousness, which is our own consciousness, we are a part of it, we are a ray of God's great presence. And from that one eternal consciousness all things have come, therefore, it is that one eternal consciousness which is the eternal everlasting substance. And that's in us. We're a part of it. Even this gross body is a part of that one eternal substance. This creation, world upon world, is from that one eternal substance. Certainly we have salvation right with us, if we can but recognize it. And then the 23rd verse, I was set up from everlasting. I was set up from everlasting, from the beginning, ere the earth was. So there you have. We have the presence of God, that eternal consciousness within us. If we can but realize it, remove the idea that we are separated from God. That's what stands in the way. And that's nothing but an idea. Now you can prove it only by knowing the reality which is within yourself, the presence of God, through meditation. You cannot reason it satisfactorily. You can know it theoretically. But until you see and feel and know it, you will not be satisfied. Realize that one thing. Master has said this. I like to use some of his quotes. Once, he says, a man consciously practices the awareness of the inner life as well as the outer life. That is, once we begin to be aware of that one life underlying this outward existence, the presence of God, he goes on to say, he discovers that the first step of salvation depends not upon delegated authorities, but upon himself. So don't look to the dictates of a church or a doctrine. Follow that doctrine of the church if it takes you inward toward yourself, where you recognize yourself as one with God. That's the reality. The Master's words are most wonderful. And so there is one eternal substance. We have to understand a little bit of metaphysics. That is, many minds have to know that. There is one eternal substance from which all things have come. And that substance is God's consciousness plus his energy. Cosmic consciousness plus his energy. The Spirit was one. When it began to move and create, it became God the Father. Cosmic consciousness plus cosmic energy. Everything is made from that. Everything, even your finest thought, your body, your deepest emotion, is nothing but the consciousness of God and His energy. And so realize that when God the Father created, this one Spirit becomes cosmic consciousness that is in the macrocosm, that's the great universe. Cosmic consciousness plus cosmic energy plus the body which those two things produce, or that one thing produces. You cannot separate the fire and the burning power. Therefore, you cannot separate God's consciousness plus its power. Now, the body which that produce is the body of universes. Now, that's the great big macrocosm, produced from the one eternal substance, God. Now, in us, the microcosm, we find the same thing. Consciousness, human consciousness, plus human energy, life force, everything you use to move, have your being, plus the body. So you see, we are made in the image of God, therefore we have within us just the same as is found in the great cosmos. If we can realize that, there will be no separation between us. The moment we realize that, we have salvation, which means to be saved from sin or delusion. There is no sin but ignorance. Delusion is nothing but the unawareness of what we are, God's children. Sin passes away on the coming of His light, though you were the worst sinner. When God's light comes into you, where is it? It does not exist. Just like your own dream. You'll come to that in a moment. Now, Master's words, and this has helped me very much, and I hope it will help you all very much. His words were these. Remember these two illustrations. The illustration of your dream and the illustration of the motion picture. Now remember, if you can consciously dream, and you all can by practicing a little bit, you will see that one part of your consciousness has become light which has taken the various forms and shapes of your dream. The other part of your consciousness remains intact. When you break the dream, where is it? That same one consciousness of yours remains. And so it is with God. His great consciousness is intact. One part is dreaming this huge thing called creation. And when it dissolves, it goes back, and only his one consciousness remains in what is called the Brahmic night. They're so long, let's not consider them. It's too long. Let us consider what we have right within ourselves. We have the same thing in the form of our dream. Now, in the dream we can enjoy everything. They seem so real, the dreams do. We can taste and smell and touch and run and be scared of this thing and frightened of that. When we wake up, where is it? Your consciousness is the underlying one reality. And so with God's great creation, His consciousness is that which remains. So realize these two things. God created light, and from that light all things have come. And so that light, directed by His consciousness in it, that Holy Ghost, the holy vibration, directed by God's consciousness in it, has produced all things. Very clear, isn't it? Perhaps not so clear. Well, reminds me of this man. He was very absent-minded. He couldn't remember names, and he met this man. His name was Hodge. And he says, now I must remember that name. So the next time I meet him, I'll remember his name. Hodge. He had it. He had a Dodge car. Hodge Dodge. I'll remember it. Hodge Dodge. Hodge Dodge. So in a few days he met him. How do you do, Mr. Hudebaker? So that's about as clear. I thought that was a good one. So those of you who have a hard time remembering names or remembering this illustration of the dream consciousness and the moving picture, remember that little story. All like the man who got out on the limb trimming the tree, trimmed it all nicely and reached down and sawed off the limb. So these little things help us to keep in mind these spiritual truths. And remember, the dream consciousness plus the moving picture is very important. You'll understand if you remember those two things. The movie beam comes from the projection booth. It comes down. There's intelligence in that beam, in the form of the film behind it. And so it is with God. He has made, from His great intelligence, these films, through which the light is projected and gives us the light and shadow like the moving picture of this great creation. If we remember those two illustrations, it'll help you very much. And you'll realize that if you were that light, not those shadows on the moving picture screen, you'd be far above sickness and sinfulness, and you would have salvation. Remember these two illustrations. Now, our Master has set forth clearly the modus operandi of creation. I'll just take a moment or two to read it, because if you understand creation just in the gist of it, so to speak, it'll be much easier for you to understand salvation. He has this to say about creation. He says, God thought out different ideas within Himself. Think of it. Just like you in your dream, think out these ideas and then project them in your dream. God thought out different ideas within Himself and projected them into His dream. And so this cosmic dream, with all its endless ramifications with which we are familiar, is produced. Then the Master goes on to say, in 35 thought categories. 35, that's all. 35 thought categories. 19 of your astral body and 16 of your physical body. That makes 35. 35 thought categories. From that vibration of light, He projected first the fine vibrations of the ethers, air, fire, and water, and finally, this gross body with which we are familiar, or this gross creation. Now that's the modus operandi, which the Master points out so clearly, as he says, by condensation of the vibratory forces, first subtle, then gross, He produced man's astral body and then his physical body. But you see, behind this projection is God's consciousness. And in that consciousness are these 35 thought categories. And from the manipulation of that and the shaping of it, think of what God is. He has produced this wonderful creation. And so, remember that there's one thing behind the creation, God's great substance, His eternal substance. If we can know that, as He is doing all things, He will let us see how the job is done. He will let us see how creation is carried on, because He's the doer. We think we are the doer. We know nothing about it. God is the doer. Let us realize that. And so this universe, real, so real and containing so many things, and all of us, as the Master said, are but dreams of the one doer, God Himself. Understand this. Know that one eternal substance, and then you will understand salvation. Now, going on just a little bit, salvation means freedom from that consciousness which makes us separated from God. Understand that. Salvation means freedom from that state of consciousness which makes us feel, I'm here and God is there. Now that's what you have to be saved from, nothing else. If you felt and knew that there was no separation between you and your Father, you would not worry about being saved from something, because you know reality. Now understand that very thing. It is the idea, the state of consciousness in which you are, in which I am, when we're in this outward consciousness, this consciousness of delusion, is what we have to be saved from. Understand that. Nothing else. Just a little idea that's firmly fixed in this place here. That you are here and God is there. That's not true. In meditation, when you rise above this outward consciousness in which these ideas flourish, you will see the one light of God, and you will know that is producing you, and you'll know that cannot die or be sick or sinful. Then you'll be saved eternally. Until you do that, you will just have to think about it, rationalize about it, and hope that it'll be true. Now do it. Do it. You have the ways and the means. The Master's left them. Do it. Keep at it. Don't be running from this to that. Do what you have. Unless you do, you will not know. What is it they say? The rolling stone gathers no moss. Keep at what Master has given you. He came from God to help us. Let us keep at it until we know it. Now, going on just a bit, one has to prove this, as Master says in his writings. We have two things. We have breath and the restless mind. I have a quotation from the AY, but I will skip it due to lack of time. But it is these two things, breath, that ties us to the body, plus the mind running this way and all over the place. It is those two things only that make us feel separated from God. Understand that. Just those two things. If we can but rise above that consciousness of the breath and restless mind, then, even though we are born mortal, we can know we are divine. Understand this thing. Just those two things. Now, how are you going to do it? You all should know by now. Meditation, which means concentration on that eternal substance from which all things have come, only that alone will do it. So now let us realize we've understood somewhat of what creation is. Now let's get down to business about salvation. Is salvation for all? Is salvation for all? All souls will be saved when they rediscover their oneness with God. You remember that one thing. Is salvation for me, you ask yourself? Yes. When you rediscover that God's consciousness is your own consciousness. As we read in Proverbs, we were always in the one consciousness of God, but this delusion got in. We forgot it. We have to once more rediscover that. When one realizes and rediscovers once more that he is not apart from that eternal substance of God, then he is saved eternally. Now that's the thing. All will be saved when they rediscover that state of consciousness, which is our true nature, which we truly are, divine children of God, not children of this dream. Understand that. Now, the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita testify to this in a wonderful way. I have one or two references which I'll give you at this time, so that you will see that these things are not perhaps the sayings of one person or one set of teachings. They are throughout all Scripture. And we're familiar with our Bible, and also we're familiar with the Bhagavad Gita, which is the essence of the Upanishads and the Vedas. Now we read in our own Bible, in St. John, the 10th chapter, the 9th verse, I am the door. I am the door. If any man enter in, he shall be saved, and shall go in and out, and find pasture. I am the door. What is the door? Well, let's take another verse. St. John, 3rd chapter, 17th verse. For God sent his Son into the world, not to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. So the door is the Christ consciousness within us, the Son of God, God the Father's presence in creation and in us. Now you can say, well, that's all right in theory, but it is not only in theory, it is there in a practical way, and those who meditate will see the door at the Christ center. They will see the ring of gold of which we sing. They will see in the center of the outer ring, in the dark center, they will see Christ's consciousness. Not in imagination, in reality. And in the center of the dark ring, they will see the little five-pointed star, which is the epitome of God the Father, cosmic consciousness. Now, don't you see, God the Father even is right within us. And His consciousness in His creation, and we're a part of His creation, is also in us as the Son. So God the Father in us as His Son is that which will save us. That's the door. Now meditation will give you the realization of that door. Meditation will help you to see the door, perceive the door, and feel the presence of God the Father within you. These two quotations from the Bible leave no excuse for us not to follow the Master's teachings of meditation, because He was a real Son of God and knew the door and passed through that door into the omniscience of God. Now also, from the Bhagavad Gita, you say, oh, well, I'm steeped too much in delusion and sin. I guess it's not for me. It is for you. It is for everyone. For in the Bhagavad Gita, the discourse, 4th discourse, 36th line, even if thou art the most sinful of all sinners, as we read before this morning, thou shalt cross over all sin by the raft of wisdom. Wisdom simply means realization. And when you realize the door of which we have spoken, the spiritual eye which can be seen at this point, and you realize the presence of Christ there, the Christ consciousness, and even God the Father in the center of the Christ consciousness, when you realize that, that's the wisdom, that's all you need, that's the raft which will take you across this sea of delusion and give you salvation. Realize those things. The self-realization teaching with these sacred techniques which had been handed down from the ages, from the great rishis. These techniques will give you the method whereby you can do these things of which I have just spoken. Not only see the door, but pass through the door. See the door, as Master says, the yogi concentrates on the spiritual eye and then sails his consciousness through into omniscience. Sails his consciousness through into that great presence of God beyond this creation. And he calls it the lightless light. Because you cannot see it with these eyes, but you can see it with the eye of the soul, and it's not light. It's always eternally bright. The lightless light, the darkless dark, the thoughtless thought. Some people say, oh, if I couldn't think, I'd die. No, you begin to live. You think too much. The thoughts run you. You run the thoughts by stopping them. And you'll see that thoughtless region wherein you feel the great joy of God's presence. Now that is what, or these are the things which the practice of the techniques which the Master has left for us will give you, will give everyone who sincerely tries, because he had passed that way. He had rediscovered incarnations ago his divinity. But he was sent by God through great spiritual law to bring those teachings here for you and for me to practice that we might be saved. Jesus said the same thing. He spoke not of the personality of Jesus, but of the Christ consciousness within him. When he said, heaven and earth shall pass away, but my word shall not, he meant the Christ consciousness which saved him many incarnations ago, perhaps. Which will save is the same consciousness which will save you and will save me. That's the door. That's the Son. That's the presence of God in His creation in each and every one of us. So let us not forget these wonderful truths which the Master has left with us. And finally, there's one uncompromising requisite. One uncompromising fact you cannot dodge, nor I cannot dodge if you're going to be saved. And it is this. We find it in Matthew 24th chapter, the 13th verse. But he that shall endure unto the end, the same shall be saved. Now what does that mean? He who shall endure, he who shall put up with these injustices and paradoxes of this world existence, which you cannot understand and which I cannot understand. He who will put up with them and endure, keeping contact with the presence of God within until the end, and not giving way to the suggestions or the pull of this cosmic dream consciousness. He who will endure keeping his consciousness fixed on the Christ center, passing through all conditions of this cosmic dream which pull us this way and that way away from God, he who shall endure and keep steadfast, keeping his consciousness on the presence of Christ within, the great cosmic consciousness of God the Father at the spiritual eye, he who hangs on to that until the end, not being swayed by the pull of this cosmic dream, he and he alone shall be saved. Realize that. The last shall be first. Those who last, who are not discouraged and run this way and that way, but keep steadfast toward God, they are the ones to be saved. And I want to close by giving the Master's words about just this one point. Everybody has to face this one point, face to face, to endure until the end, steadfastly. If you oscillate, you're not fair with God. If you oscillate, your faith is not full. If you oscillate, love has not been perfected in you. Those who love God truly do not oscillate. They keep steadfast. And the Master has this to say most beautifully. No matter what your impulses dictate, no matter what the impulses try to make you do, let nothing sit on the throne of your heart but God. And then finally he says, if you love this creation of God more than Him, you will be disillusioned. God first, God in the middle, and God last. Let us sit upright just a moment. Let the Master's words sink into our consciousness so that we never forget what He is trying with His, as He did when He was here, with all His strength. Let us realize that.